Recorded at the Kitchen Studios. This is the Pencil Pushers Podcast.
Welcome, Leadheads. This is the Pencil Pushers Podcast, and I'm your humble host, Mike Rosado. Today, we speak with illustrator, muralist, and figurative artist Taylor White. Listen in as we speak about her artistic path and stylings, how her travels around the world opened her eyes to a whole new career, and what it means to be a street artist these days, and how its perception has changed with the public. Taylor was great to speak with, and I'm already looking forward to having her back. Now do yourself a favor and visit her on Instagram at Taylurk, that's Taylurk, and check out her site at taylorwhite.art while you listen in. So, without further ado, I invite you to sit back, grab a nice cold one, and enjoy our chat with Taylor. Everybody, we are with Taylor White, a local artist, but also an internationally recognized painter, muralist, illustrator, and we're just really excited to have you. I have been admiring your work for some time just by driving by and seeing the great artwork in downtown, but I had actually no idea who it was tied to. You're also a fellow SCAD, ex-SCAD patriot, and it's
Go
awesome.
Bees.
That's right. So it's really great to have you here. Welcome.
All right. Thank you so much for having me. I'm honored. Excited to have a conversation.
Yeah. You've done more traveling than I have, and you're younger than me. So let's go right into it. I think right out of college, you went to Savannah College of Art and Design.
Correct, yeah.
And then you got a job in Norway. Is that right?
Yeah, I did. So we'll start from that point as far as the backstory goes. I think that's probably the most relevant. So I actually hadn't been anywhere outside of the country until I was 18, or until I graduated after SCAD. And I remember thinking, I was in my kind of final year at SCAD, and everybody was making plans to either move to LA or New York, and
you were getting your degree in illustration, right?
I was in illustration, yeah. So, the path was set, basically. I could move to Brooklyn, get a studio in Greenpoint, and join the SOI and work for Condé Nast. But then I just felt like I needed to do something else, and I realized I had never been anywhere. Mm-hmm. And I think I was driving home for Thanksgiving one year, and I thought to myself, maybe I'll just move to the Netherlands.
You had no dream of doing that in the past?
Not really. I mean, I think in the past I was just kind of focused on getting through school and figuring out a way to get paid to do art. But as soon as I kind of realized that I had to set out and do the living of the life, I kind of just wanted to go do something different than what all my peers were doing. And so I got home that night, and I said, "Hey, Mom, I think I want to move overseas." And she said, "Well, why don't you call Annette?" And Annette was our au pair when I was 3, who my mom still kept. My mom's a wizard at keeping in touch with people. And so she was still in communication with Annette, and Annette was like, "Oh, hell yeah, totally, come and live with us for a little while." And
well, so she was from Norway?
She was from she was an au pair from Oslo. And she's, since married and had the time kids that were 8 and 12. And she said, come stay, you can stay in our house just speaking English to the girls. And I was like, well, sounds like a deal.
Yeah.
So I did that. And I kind of I didn't have any expectations. We were packing one day, and my mom said something to the effect of oh, wouldn't it be so great if you got a full-time job over there and decided to move? And I just rolled my eyes, and I was like, yeah, right, shut up. And and then that's basically exactly what happened.
So you went there with no intention. It was just literally, it wasn't there to get a job necessarily. It was there to just maybe hang out for the summer or a couple months or something like that?
The American travel visa gave me 3 months, and I figured I would just see what happens in those 3 months. I obviously, I had my portfolio, and I planned on shopping it around and trying to do some freelance stuff.
Yeah.
But I had no idea, what to expect, and the landscape over there was so different. I interviewed with a couple of companies. I was gonna do, skins for, Skull Candy headphones, and like iPhone cases and stuff.
So you're just like designing basically the way, like the patterns and the art that would go on it.
I was like just doing just illustrations that would wrap around products or something. But I actually didn't end up doing any of that. I just kind of interviewed for the position, and then what ended up happening was the next door neighbor of Annette, my au pair, who I was staying with, happened to be an art director at the foremost advertising agency in Oslo.
Wow.
And
that's a nice little
he
coincidence.
looked at my work and was blown away, and he said, well, he took it to his team, and he came back with a job. He said, like, we have a project we want you to storyboard for us. It was for a bank, and they were making like a commercial. So it was a film, like a commercial? Okay, yeah. Yeah. So they gave me like the brief, and I went up into this little bedroom. I was staying in one of the girls' bedrooms, and I just sat at this little desk for like the whole weekend and drew the storyboard, and give it back to them. They were like, "We'll pay you." Like, they were going to pay me. I can't remember how much they paid me, but it sounded good. So,
usually not too choosy around that time.
No, I mean, it was Norwegian kroner, so it sounded probably like more than, if something like 3,000 crowns or something like that. I don't remember, but, I was like, you want to pay me to do a job? That sounds great.
Yeah.
So I gave it back to him, and he came back to me something like the next day or a couple of days later and was like, dude, they shit their pants. They love that. And I've never seen a reaction like that for like a storyboard. Because usually, they in pre-production, a lot of times they kind of just do the best they can to cobble together images that are going to communicate the product or whatever, but they'd never had like an illustrator do that. Yeah. Yeah. So, and at the time, advertising agencies in Norway, at least, didn't, like, I was the first. Yeah. So I'm jumping forward a little bit, but they came back to me and said, like, well, man, we're like, this went over really well. We'd like to, hire you. So at the time I had a few months left in my visa, and they said, so we arranged that I would basically freelance, but they would give me a desk until after my visa ran out. And then I went home, and then I got a work visa to come back. And I worked there for 3 years, basically just doing anything like pre-production illustrations, mostly storyboarding. Did you enjoy it? And I did. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed parts of it, and then other parts of it I found a little frustrating, but that's like with any job. Sure. So after a while, it kind of got to a point where I felt like I was just kind of doing the same thing, day after day. And I was young and ambitious, and in Norway, that's kind of a cultural anomaly.
Really? Yeah. Now, in Norway, am I wrong in that there's like 6 months of nighttime? Is that the right area? Yeah. What is in parts of Norway? I mean, I was in Oslo, which is kind of south, so we still had cycles. Okay. But they became very short. In the summer, I did experience one summer where the sun didn't go down. It just got into this like twilight and then kind of came back up again. But in the winter, it was a nightmare. It was like, you'd get up for work. I think I got up for work at like 7 a.m. and it was pitch dark. And then I'd go to work, and the sun would come up while I was at work, and then it would also set while I was at work. And so by the time I left, it was dark again. Right. So I took up snowboarding, which was great. I mean, I had friends in the office that also snowboarded, and we could get on a train after work. I had to like schlep all my gear to work and put it in the coat closet or whatever. And then we would just take the train up. And by the time we got there, we probably had like an hour and a half before the park closed, but we shredded it. Nice. And that was a lot of fun. I miss that. Were you doing anything outside of your work? Did you start dabbling into, your own personal work?
I was fortunate, and I'm really grateful for the work environment that I was in, that I did have a lot of free time. Like when they didn't need an illustrator, I was kind of left alone to do my own thing, and I had all the resources available. Like I had my desk and my computer, and there was a sort of web-based, I guess a subsidiary. I don't know if they were two separate companies, but they've definitely since merged. But the upstairs company was web-based, and I ended up doing a lot of illustrations for them.
Oh, cool.
They borrowed me almost more than my real job did after a while, because that was kind of at the time when web-based advertising and social media was kind of soaring, and I got to do a lot of stuff that was really creative and fun, whereas in the pre-production stuff you're really just trying to draw things that communicate to someone with no imagination. Like the client that is being pitched to is somebody who doesn't visualize, I think that was probably the hardest thing to get through my little head at the time, was that like I'm really trying to serve a person who can't visualize, so I have to be very clear in my illustrations. Yep. And I used to get so damn
almost
frustrated
have to be
when they would come
kind of
back.
director of photography in some ways, figuring out interesting ways to portray scenes, help people kind of visualize the storytelling of a 45-second commercial.
Absolutely, and it is really your job as an illustrator to communicate succinctly and effectively. And at the time I was a little bit naive, and I got really frustrated when they would bring my illustrations back to me and say, well, we really need you to draw this again and give them bigger smiles, your characters bigger smiles. And I was like you can't just imagine that they have bigger smiles. Or I would have to change like hair color and skin tone and stuff like that. I'm gonna have to redraw entire panels just to like give people bigger smiles and different hair. Yeah. And it's like you can't just explain it to them. Like imagine this, but with like curly hair and a big smile. Yeah, right. But right. You can't. Like it really is.
This is still before the days of iPads and apps like Procreate, where you can quickly. I'm sure this is none of this is digital drawing. I guess, right?
I'm pretty sure I didn't have a tablet back then. Yeah. I don't actually recall. I might have had one. I definitely didn't have an iPad. I did most of my stuff. So the time it takes to erase or redraw and definitely. So anyway, so you did that for about 3 years, and then you were like, to hell with this. I need to get some sun in me some more. And like, what was the story for you moving to Melbourne? I think I started to get itchy after 2 years. Yeah. And then, the advice that I kept getting from my elders was stick it out for as long as possible, because it looks better on a resume to have a job for more than a year. Sure. So now I haven't used a resume since then. But I kept it going just because I thought, it's excellent pay, and it was a great time. Like, I'm really happy for my experience there, even though I did struggle with depression and all of that stuff, just the kind of stuff that comes with being alone in a foreign country, which barely gets any sunlight, which barely gets any sunlight, and in a different culture, and it's a different culture, and it not on the surface, but it shows in many different ways. And so I did sort of struggle socially, even though I had a lot of like friends. So anyway, and I was just kind of like, I'm just kind of tired of not feeling like I'm moving not feeling like there's a bar that's higher than what I'm doing. But I also was fearful of striking out blindly. Like I didn't know where I wanted to go next. So I thought, it's like, well, I could move to New York, but at the time, like, that didn't really sound appealing. Or I could move to LA, but I just didn't have like the impetus or like the real catalyst to go somewhere new and start over. Yeah. At that point. And so, as luck would have it, the crash of 2008 caught up to Norway, and they let me go from the job. Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. So they kind of, they were looking over their numbers, and they were like, well, who do we use the least often right now? And it was the Illustrator. So, you have Photoshop, and you have like a lot of people there were pretty good enough at image making that they didn't really need to keep a full-time illustrator on anymore. I guess they figured out there was a reason that no one had ever been hired before.
Right.
And so, they were so like, apologetic and everything. And they're like, we'll send you like the best recommendations to another firm in Norway. And I was like, oh, hold the phone. Like, this is what I needed. Like, I'm gonna go home. I almost want to say it was like, obviously the time frame gets condensed in your memory, but I want to say it was something like that very night that I was let go, and I was on instant messenger with a friend of mine. And I was saying, like, I'm going to leave Norway. I don't know where to go next. And she's like, well, after Christmas, I'm going to Melbourne. Do you want to come? And I had not even thought about Australia before, but I looked up the visa process and, like, went through the whole thing, and I got approved for a working holiday in, like, 2 hours. And so I said, well,
wow.
All right, I guess I'm going to Melbourne.
Wow.
Yeah. And
that's insane. I didn't think it would be that easy.
The tourist visa, like the first year tourist visas are very easy to get. It's just the extensions that are hard.
So things started to change though by that time. I mean, this is where you really started to delve into painting and noticing street art. Is that sort of a thing that you noticed? Does Melbourne have a pretty deep community in that regard?
Yeah, it really does. And I hadn't thought about street art as a career path for me. I always thought, you had to be a graffiti artist, and I wasn't really much of one. If I rewind about a year, I started painting like gallery work when I was still in Norway, and I had met...
Oh, you were? Okay.
I was still in Norway, and I had met a gentleman who had a gallery, and he happened to be Australian. And he was just like, yeah, you need to be painting. So he gave me like a studio space in this cold ass room in the back of the gallery, and I prepared to like do an exhibition. So I ended up doing my very first solo exhibition like right before I left in 2010.
Okay.
So I spent like months doing nothing but like I went to work, and then I walked like in order to get to the gallery I had to walk like across town. And I just strategized that if I left work and walked a certain route on the way to the gallery, I would run into all the people that I wanted to talk to and get my like social quota for the day, and then have the energy to like go and work on paintings until the middle of the night when I would walk home.
Yeah. Okay.
And,
so you were diving into painting before you went down to Australia.
I was, and I did huge paintings, and I had no idea. Like, I didn't have a style. I had no idea. Like, I was just kind of like, I need to experiment and try to, figure out how to do like the kind of work that I want to do. And so, but the exhibition did really well actually, because I had a lot of support. So I sold a fair amount of stuff and was really happy. And then, like, I was just like, okay, well, like I really needed to like pursue painting in some way. And I came from having gone to SCAD, like, as like I kind of swallowed the idea that in order to be successful as an artist I had to like have a career, like a commercial job. So I didn't even take any painting classes at SCAD. I just went straight into, I thought I was going to do animation at first.
Hand-drawn?
And then hand-drawn. I hated 3D animation. It was just so
sounds like
tedious. And I took a few animation classes, really liked the 2D animation, but then also it was like, I don't want to
Who was your professor there?
Oh, God, I can't. What was his name? I can picture him.
What did he look like?
He looked like your friendly neighbor. He had this mustache and this like blonde hair, and he wore a tie. He did a lot of animation like on the early Disney films, not the early Disney films, but
Phil Young.
Yes, Phil Young.
That was my when I was 13 years old, I wrote to Disney, and he was my pen pal for like 10 years.
Phil Young is the absolute bomb. He let me get away with so much because like he was just like, yeah, you're like, you've got the chops and you're a drawer, and this path may not be like what you want, a great teacher.
Yeah. I'll tell you some stories about
shouts
him
out.
offline. He's tops. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to hear them. Shouts out if is he still around?
I've been trying to seek him for some time.
Right.
I've been through the podcast. I've been trying to chat. I'm chatting with Disney animators regularly now, and I'm always like, "Have you heard Phil lately?" And nobody seems to have heard from him for a little while. So,
Well, I hope he's still around, and if he's out there, maybe he'll stumble upon this interview and
reel him in.
Yeah. Come on, Phil Young. Yeah, that's so funny. He was one of those shining lights in my educational memory. I enjoyed it, but also I don't want to spend weeks after, like, kids who are really into animation just loved, like, getting really minutely into their work, and they would spend, like, weeks, months on end doing stuff, and then what you have to show for it is, like, a half a second. And so I was just kind of like, I think I kind of like to draw. I don't like to do the same thing over and over again.
Yeah.
Which
in terms
shows
of style,
up,
or
it kind of shows up. It'll show up in my conversation about commercial painting these days too, later on in the conversation. But, like, I did realize that in college is that, like, I don't want to, like, once I've drawn it. I want to move on to do something else.
Yeah.
And so I switched over. I had a friend who was in illustration and thought maybe that'd be more my vein. I could just draw one image and be done with it and move on to another image.
Yeah.
So that's what I ended up I might have done, I think my illustration degree definitely has been useful in how I approach my image making, but I often wish that I had done something like graphic design or painting.
Yeah. Why is that?
Design, because it's really useful, and painting just to have a little bit more
technique
foundations under my belt. Like, all my painting is self-taught,
Sure. Yeah, the beauty of graphic design more than illustration, I think, is because I went to school for illustration, and but I think foundationally, I think one thing that graphic design has over illustration a lot of times is that it's very focused on simplifying your ideas as much as possible, keeping composition an incredibly important part of the design process. And whether you're doing illustration or painting or tapestry work, if you have a graphic design sensibility or some sort of foundation in that, it tells you, it informs you innately how to really lay out the piece of art that you're going to do. And I don't care if it's large scale paintings or even animation, knowing how to pose and compose is such a fundamental part of graphic design that I think it's really important for anybody who gets into the creative field to have a sense of that.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. It is the fundamentals of good image quality and good image making. If you layer the fundamentals of image making with, like, technical painting, and all kinds of other stuff, that you can have a combination of skills that really just click in. So I'm actually trying to teach myself graphic design right now. So
nice. So so getting back to Australia, so you start delving into, so you're kind of doing large scale stuff in Norway. You did the exhibit there, and it was a success. Sort of lit a fire in you a little bit, at least in terms of maybe guiding you towards the direction you were going to maybe head as far as your career is concerned. And you get to Australia, and you start being a part of this community. I'm assuming, walking the streets, you start seeing all the cool opportunities there were to do large scale pieces of art, right? Like, how did that develop?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. I kind of got there, and, like, there's this, like, overwhelm visually. Every wall in Melbourne, at least I actually ended up landing in the perfect spot, like, just serendipitously. Like, knowing what I know now about Melbourne, if my friend's friend had lived in another suburb, I could have had a different experience. but they happened to live in Northcote, which is like one suburb north of Fitzroy, which was at the time like kind of where all the street art was concentrated, or at least much of it was.
Yeah.
And so I ended up just getting there, and it's, you know, it wasn't immediate. I took a couple of weeks to kind of like try to figure my shit out and make friends and hang and stuff like that. But then, you know, I ended up getting working, you know, my easiest way throughout my entire life that I ever got attention was to carry my sketchbook and just sit in a corner and draw, and someone would inevitably like look at it and, you know, want to know what's up. Yeah. And so that's basically how I managed in Melbourne too. I like just started going to these places where I wanted to know people and like drawing, and people would come and talk to me and want to know what's up, you know?
Yeah.
And so
do you consider yourself a little bit more on the introverted side or extroverted?
For sure. Yeah.
Wait, which one?
Like introverted, yeah. You know, I prefer to like, you know, approach slowly. You know, I wonder what my life would look like if I was more of a vivacious person, but you know, I can only imagine.
Seems like you're doing okay.
Yeah, I'm doing fine. But I started putting little pen drawing, because I didn't have a studio or anything. Like I was sharing a bedroom with my friend at the time, and had no space. So I just did little pen drawings on paper and submitted them into this gallery. And you know, the gallery in question was kind of known for being really like, you know, easy to get into. So I just was like, all right, fine, I'll hang it in that gallery show. And then, you know, I had made some friends by then, and so I started showing the work around. Like friends would go to these galleries, and then I ended up getting into another show at another gallery, and that's when this friend of mine's boyfriend saw it and was like, hey, you know, you should come and do some work for us. Like this was Juddy Roller, the studio, which is now like one of Australia's hugest like art curation companies. And at the time it was just Sean and his little cafe. So he that's the Juddy Roller was the cafe. And so, but he did like events. And he was curating a lot of these like street art related events where it would just be like a laneway graffiti exhibition. And he invited me to do a piece for this laneway exhibition, and I had, you know, at the time, aside from my large scale paintings, I didn't really do much other than illustration. So all my work, the work that I put in the first show that I got into was just these like little 8x10 like ballpoint pen and acrylic, like very sort of soft and like ghostly simple. Some of them I think are still online, but then I just sort of, the bigger I got, like the more my technique kind of evolved. So when I got invited to be in this Illogic
the bigger you
show,
got in scope or in terms of
size,
of scale,
like in scale, it was all scale. Like I was like, okay, well I gotta get some paint, and then I painted.
How do you get to that point? How do you get to that point of saying, you know what, I think I want to try and grab like a 30 by 40 surface? I mean, how do you get to that point of being okay with taking that daunting task? I mean, it's got to be
like
it's got to be pretty daunting, isn't it?
For me, it was like circumstantial. It's like, okay, as long as I have I was like a goldfish. I'll get as big as my container, you know. So at the time when I was in a suitcase in my friend's guest room with another friend, I was like drawing on 8x10s, and then I had like a bedroom studio, and I got like a little bigger, and then I got invited into this studio, and I was able to borrow a studio space to do this. I did this like plywood. I get this. It was like a wall, like a small rectangular wall with a door, and I had to devise something without having a character style or anything like that. And I, you know, using my illustration background, I was like, well, okay. And so I did 5 like children, like boys, kind of in a row, kind of sort of lurking as if they're waiting for someone to come through the door, and they all have like slingshots and sticks and stuff. And I made that and cut it out I painted it on plywood and then cut it out, like jigsawed it out, and then we fastened it to the wall, and it was there for a long time.
How big did that wind up being?
I mean, it was not bigger than a single piece of plywood, so like 4 feet ish. Tall. And then
how'd that feel?
Like 4x7. It was fun. I mean, it was hard because I was like, I don't know what I'm doing, and I was just really experimenting with materials and trying to figure it out, and having like insecurity about it. It's like, I have to, like, people can't know that I don't know what I'm doing, you know. And
that's kind of hard to do when you're like exposing the art for everybody to see.
Of course. I mean, but I mean, it's kind of part of the process. Is like trying, at a certain point, you kind of just have to let go of the possibility of it being like looking like crap, and just
you
do what you can do, and say, like, when you're exhibiting something, it's like, this isn't like a referendum on my quality as an artist as a whole. This is like what I am. This is the best I can do in this moment.
Right.
And so it's like a part in a chronological sequence, rather than just like
point. It's a point.
It's like, and I think that's where I kind of had to shift my mindset somewhere along the line, because I used to sort of think of every project as like me, like this is me showing what I can do. So like I felt like I had something to prove, and if I felt like I fell short of that, then I would get really bummed. And obviously, of course, you know, as with most artists, I think every project lets you down in some way. So I always was disappointed in myself.
Yeah. One thing, just a quick note that I've discovered, because I do have that inside myself too, you know, in terms of like, you know, failing to meet your own set of expectations, is
absolutely
that I switched. It's sort of a psychological trick, but it really does work on a lot of different levels, which is just calling different projects that I delve into, because I do a lot of different kinds of things, because I just am very interested in different styles. I'm interested in different, you know, media, is to call each project an experiment. And then that way I don't put so much expectation on myself, or kind of projecting it to others too, you know, that this is an experiment. But so there's power in that for yourself, but also, you know, at the beginning when you tell yourself that, there's some power in that, but also going back, knowing that it was an experiment, it gives you more of an opportunity to be more wide-eyed, to observe what you had just created and see how you can improve on it later on. It sort of puts you off the hook a little bit, I guess, is what I'm saying. Yeah,
I agree. And I think that I have like a similar approach, which is just calling everything a process, part of the process, you know? Because everything, you know, when I'm exploring the techniques and stuff that I'm exploring now, especially now that I feel confident that I know what I'm doing for the most part, it's like, it's just, this is what I'm making with these techniques and these ideas and these compositions and the skills that I've picked up along the way, and let me see what I can do with that. And this may be a finished piece, but it's still part of the process. You know? So people are able to sort of like see like stepping stones.
I mean, to me, it feels like a lot of painters try to manage the idea of moving from one style to another, because you can't just do something completely different every single time. I guess you can, but there's a sense of like, I'm still learning with this particular style, and so I'm going to do a series that may last a couple of years before you start noticing dramatic differences in a style that you're doing. So how do you manage the psychology of wanting to do for different styles?
Well, that's a good question. I think I'll preface it by saying there really are no rules, except there are, you know, like in a certain context, it's like if you're trying to be commercially successful and you don't want to confuse your audience, you really are a little bit more limited to your pacing in terms of all the styles that you can experiment with. Unless you're someone whose reputation precedes you, whose name is bigger than the work that you're doing.
Like
which
a
is,
Picasso,
which is a rare, or any, like a James Jean. James Jean is an artist that stands out as someone who has been able to experiment with a myriad of different styles, and they've all been exquisite, and they've all had his hand, and they've all been easy to identify. But even he struggled with certain styles, struggled getting them to connect with audiences and stuff like that. If you listen to some of his explanations, but so it's not all you don't really know what's going on behind the scenes or what's making sales or whatever.
Sure.
You just know what you see and what you're like, oh my god, that's amazing, because but I never wanted to be somebody who was stuck doing the same thing over and over again. I said that just a few minutes ago with the animation. So I'm careful making sure that I'm able to be versatile and always evolving and still have it be cohesive.
Yeah.
There would just be nothing and identifiable. And there's some commercial artists that make their living painting the same character, and they do really well. And some people, they make absolute bank doing the same character over and again. And then, but the drawback to that is, once you start selling at volumes doing a certain thing, then you're stuck doing that thing. And you're left your evolutions become more micro evolutions, because I can't just be okay, I'm gonna paint, I was painting little kids' faces back in 2012, and then in 2013 or so I completely switched to dancers and stuff, and my little kid faces did really well, but I was done at a certain point.
Yeah.
I want to be able to get out when I'm done.
Yeah.
Of anything, I don't want to be okay, I don't want to be afraid to switch it up because I don't think it'll sell, or my gallery won't accept it, or anything like that, or because my audience will reject it, Yeah.
Do you feel like that's a overarching challenge that a lot of painters and independent artists have, when
I think it is. I think it is a challenge for a lot of artists who get stuck doing a motif or a character.
Does that include you? Do you feel that way too?
That's not hard for everybody, but I know that it's hard for some. I don't at this point. I'm thankful that I don't feel stuck.
Good.
I still feel like I'm pretty free to explore. There are other facets of my career that I wish were different in a certain way, but I'm doing really well just being able to do my thing, which is great. I would say that I'm 8 years into my career. No, let's say I'm 10 years, because I'll mark it from my first gallery show. Why not? So I'm 10 years into it, and I feel like I'm just now finding my thing, finding what really makes me happy to be painting,
What is that?
It's just it's not a thing. It's kind of an approach that I really like. It's the way I approach color and composition and object placement and stuff like that. It's just kind of I really enjoy the mark making process in making these things. So it's with murals, it's a little different because sometimes will adjust my approach based on the client. And I would really aspire to get to a place in my career where I don't have to make any adjustments, where they're coming at me because they want my stuff,
Right.
But now I'd say maybe 60-70% of my income is coming from clients who want my work, but they also want
they want to be a part of the process.
They're so it's so that's where my illustration background kind of comes in handy, is to be able to communicate a story in the illustration in the mural that they want. And still be relatively recognizable.
Do you ever have anybody asking for you to have your paintings just have a little more smile in them?
God, kill me. Yeah, I mean, that's the great thing about the freedom I have now is like I don't run into a whole lot of that, and I'm at least able to like clients will kind of defer to my advice a lot of the time, where if they say like, oh, how about this, and I'll be like, well, we could do it that way, but here's what we would lose, or here's what the consequences of doing it that way would be, and they'd be like, oh, okay, like then we'll do it your way, It's always like a yes but in my approach to them now.
I'm curious because like your style that I'm most familiar with is definitely where you're bringing together multiple figures. And now knowing your background of wanting to get into animation, it really makes a lot of sense because there is so much movement. It is very anthropomorphic. You have your love of dance, I think, is very interesting. And was that evolving in Australia before you came back? Because you came back to Raleigh probably not more than a year after you were down south. I mean,
I came back to Raleigh. I was in Australia for just under 2 years, almost 2 years. And the reason I came back was just because my visa ran out, and I was just exhausted at that point, just feeling kind of unsettled and ready to like have my own furniture, Yeah. So I think the switch happened like 2012 or 2013. I was kind of hanging around with a lot of circus people.
Really?
And and so that's how I started to get interested in dance, in movement. I had some friends who were like hula hoopers and just performers and stuff, and
like traveling on trains and stuff like that with like elephants and stuff.
No, like more like less Ringling Brothers, more Cirque du Soleil.
Gotcha.
But
nice.
If I'm thinking back through it real quick, I was in Berlin and I was gonna do a mural at Stadtbad, which is no longer a thing, but at the time it was like a studio space, and I got hooked up with someone who got hooked up with someone, and they let me paint that wall, and I was like, I don't know what I want to paint. I'm like over the kids thing. And I was hanging with a dancer and a clown at the time.
Like an actual clown, right?
Like a clown, yeah. Like a guy, like a artist. He was really good.
Nice.
Pokey McCorkle, which is his real name.
Wow.
Yeah, and he was a juggler and a isolation artist and that kind of thing. And Tiana was a hooper and dancer and stuff. And so I was hanging out with them, and they were busking, and I was just drawing them.
Was this in Berlin? This was in Berlin? Okay. So
that was like the first time I painted full bodies. It was really very rudimentary. It looked like cartoonish almost. Mm-hmm. And then obviously got more studied and better at, figuring out the human form in motion. And what I really liked about it was like the contortion and the way that people, like Tiana was very improvisational in her movement. And it was not like anything I'd ever really seen.
Wow.
So then there's the contact improvisation, which is a dance form that is kind of just like it sounds. Like it's two people who are, the object of the dance is to maintain a point of contact at all times.
Right.
But that point of contact is always moving. So as you dance, like the other, you can't tell who's leading, who's following. It's like there's a leader and a follower, but you never really know who's who. And
sure.
Because it's all very presenced and improvisational, and like so. People will just fold all over each other, and it creates some really interesting shapes. And so I started just looking at shapes of humans in that way, and then breaking them down and abstract, like flattening and abstracting, and then like pulling out the forms that I was interested in, because I'm very into like the rendering of forms. Like if I see like juicy like light and shadow, I love like the texture in the skin and the knuckles.
Yeah,
like I just get better. Like so nerdy over that, like painting that,
Yeah.
But
your renderings are really beautiful.
Thank you. Just figuring out how how to make a good image that played to my strengths and masked my weaknesses, and also like let me have the most fun, you know.
Yeah.
So that's how I got where I'm at.
I'm curious about your process a little bit now. When you're experimenting with compositions and stuff, do you start small scale? Do you start on the computer? Is a computer ever a part of that?
Almost always, yeah. These days I'm starting. These days I can make Photoshop collages really quickly, and I have a lot of fun with them.
Mm-hmm.
So I start with that a lot of times. Sometimes it'll be like a sketch or an idea or whatever, but I like to, get as quickly as possible to the visual image as I can,
Mm-hmm.
So I have assets that I have taken myself and purchased from, purchase licenses for and that kind of thing, and I just have like big folders on my hard drive of stuff, and
like photos and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
photos. And so I'll just sit there and mess around with different things, and I'll use different techniques that I've just learned and just see how I can incorporate that. And like I just learned how to make like something look like it's frozen yesterday. Because I'm just for a mural project I'm working on.
Yeah.
And so like just I'll learn how I'll just get better at Photoshop through some like random pathway, and then I'll want to play around with the techniques that I've learned and everything, and so then I'll just mess around with no real aim until something looks good.
Nice.
So and then I'll just take that composition that I made in Photoshop and transfer it to a large canvas and then figure out how to paint it.
Yeah, is that pretty difficult to scale? I'm super ignorant on this. I'm sure I'm not going to be alone for people who are listening. I mean, is it difficult to scale large, when you're starting small, to put something that's potentially going to be, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 feet high? I mean... Oh,
yeah, how to scale up. That's like my most common question.
Well, we'll skip it then.
No, it's cool. I'll answer it just to put this to bed once and for all my listeners out there. It is not hard to scale up once you've done it a few times.
Yeah. Okay.
And there's a bunch of different ways you can do it. There are a lot of tricks the best trick in the industry right now with muralists is like the free grid, which an artist called Roan is credited with inventing. And he shared it with, you share it with, it just got disseminated through the muralist community. And it's like, you just basically there's a couple different ways to do it, but you just basically find waypoints on whatever wall you're painting on.
Mm-hmm.
And, if it's a wall that has a lot of like natural waypoints, like windows and things, you can use those. But if it's a big flat wall, you can make your own just by drawing them in. And then, so like a lot of times you'll see mural.
What are you calling them? Waypoints or
waypoints? That's what I call them. It's just like any kind of mark that you can reference when you're drawing it up. So basically, like, say you have a big rectangle and all you have are bricks, and you don't want to sit there and just count bricks, which I've done too. But you can draw like any shape as long as the shapes are like differential, they're different from each other.
Okay.
So you don't lose your place. And then you take a picture of that, and then you bring it into the computer, and then you overlay your design onto that in the computer.
Oh, yeah.
So then you have like, it's like a grid technique basically, but without having to do math. And so then you have the picture, and it's like, I have a face that's overlaid over this whole wall, and I can say, okay, well, the corner of this eye starts right there where that triangle shape is. And then it arches up above, like kind of 3 bricks up and 4 bricks over, and that's like the crest of it, and then it kind of goes down here over by this like star shape, and You get the idea. You can kind of just like, you just map basically your lines.
So this is vastly different than what would probably be a lot smaller, but like, for example, I did a mural that's inside our office that's literally just a wall. And all I did was I just projected it on I used a projector.
Yeah,
right?
easy. You can use a projector. I use projectors too. It's just really like you use whatever tool is going to be right for the job,
Yeah. But what you're saying sounds like you're more freestyling it. I mean, you're using certain points on the wall itself, but you're kind of freestyling it. So you're not tracing. You're literally, you have your idea, of course.
Yeah, I mean, I have a reference, obviously, but then I freehand based on using the reference and using my waypoints. And sometimes, sometimes I just can't be bothered to do the grid, and so I'm like, okay, I'll just get a really high resolution photo where I can see all the bricks and just say, like, and count them. Like, okay, like, here, it's going to start roughly here. And, like, after a while, and the further you get in the drawing, you can actually just reference the drawing itself. So... it's like, okay, well, this hand is here and this hand needs to be this far down from it. And so you just, I don't know. It's not as hard as it sounds.
Yeah.
Once you're up there and you're really just like, okay, I'm just following a schematic basically.
Yeah.
But then, smaller walls, I've freehanded entire walls before that I didn't want to grid because gridding takes time too. And then I've used projector, and then I've used a bunch of different types of grid techniques and all kinds of stuff. So it really just depends on like your environment and your factors of time and of like what you feel like doing. And because projector doesn't always work because sometimes like
it gets skewed.
Sometimes it gets skewed, or you can't, like if you're outside, you really need somebody whose job it is to guard the projector and make sure that it's still working. Because if I'm like 30 feet up in the air trying to project, like forget about it.
Yeah,
I can't. I can't just keep going back and forth between the projector and make like turn like your computer goes to sleep and it's like. But also projecting sucks because like once you're up against the wall, you can't see the lines.
Right.
Like you can see them when you're standing back there, but like if you're up there, it turns into this big blurry blob. But it does work in some circumstances. And it works inside. I like projecting inside if there's room.
Sure. But, you don't have to be. You're not so beholden to sunlight too, which can change the way.
Exactly. It's like if I'm projecting in an office building and there's no curtains, I'm like, okay, I have to wait till nightfall, and even then there's still street like light pollution. Yeah. But even when I project, I don't project the whole image. I just project enough of it so that I can know what I'm doing, and then I'll fill in the rest. But because I just don't, it hurts. I don't enjoy projecting. It's probably like my least favorite technique, but it's sometimes the quickest. So
sure,
I'll do it.
So you partnered. Basically the one I'm most familiar with, the mural that I'm most familiar with here in Raleigh, North Carolina, you did a partnership with Google Fiber, is that right? And do you see, so essentially why don't you just tell us a little bit about that? Like, how did that come to be, and maybe explain to the listeners what was so unique about that project?
Well, I got a call from Kelly McChesney, who then told me I was going to get a call from Jedediah Gant. And then Jedediah Gant called and said that Google Fiber had talked to him about trying to do mural in Raleigh. I was actually in Atlanta at the time because I was working on an exhibition down there. Project manager for the fiber office, was like the fiber office in Durham, were going to be in Atlanta at a certain point. So they came and I showed them my work, like my canvas work and stuff, and they just got really excited about kind of the AR component, which hadn't been a factor in the original pitch. I think that kind of technology was something that they were kind of, that technology was something that they had been working with and implementing in some things that they were doing that hadn't really been released yet, but it was something that they were really excited about playing with. And so, Alan kind of saw my work and was just like, well, we got to do. He just kind of got passionate about the idea of making it an AR mural. And so it kind of grew from there. It was originally kind of just supposed to be like a little banger, somewhere on a wall somewhere that people could take selfies with and stuff. But,
but for those that don't know about what exactly it is, it literally is a tool. It's an app, I guess, right? And basically you can use your camera to look at the mural, and the mural basically comes out on your phone.
Yeah, it
comes out three-dimensionally.
Yeah, it's programmed to recognize the image that you're looking at, and then based on the programming, it can do whatever you want to do.
Protrude them out.
Yeah, so like protrude them out into the space, and so it appears as if the in my case, the dancers that I painted on the wall, it appears as if they're hovering in space above your head, you know? And
did you find that stuff interesting though? I mean, is this that kind of partnership? Is that,
It's interesting. I can't go into detail, but there might be another one coming up in Raleigh soon.
Right on.
Yeah, we got on this kick about developing an AR project, and at the time this was another sort of frontier. I never really had done anything of the sort, and actually I didn't really know what AR was. I chose the composition I chose for a reason, and that was because it was like the shapes that it made were easy for the computer to recognize.
Okay.
If I had done like a more abstract thing, like I have done in some of my paintings, like I don't think it wouldn't have really made sense. So you wanted something that would read well as a standalone image and be nice and also be manageable at that size, and also be like something the computer could recognize. So there was a lot of thought that went into the composition.
And you were working with their team like collaboratively to make sure that they were able to get the biggest bang for the buck in terms of the technology being able to... I did my
very best, and I don't want to talk crap about the project, but the but negates everything that comes before the sentence, as they say. But anyway, no, it was a great learning experience, and there was a lot of things that could have been done better and could have been handled better. I feel like expectations could have been managed more appropriately on that project. I think the project manager got really excited, and I got really excited at, imagine if the sky's the limit and you can just tell a computer to do whatever you can imagine it to do. And I'm like, okay, do this, that, and then have it be fully animated and have it change its mood depending on like the weather, like you could have like a sensor that picks up input data from any metric you can imagine, and then that could inform the animation and stuff. So I was like, I had this very convoluted idea, and was kind of, until about halfway through the project, led to believe that was possible. And then the development team kind of got frustrated, and it ended up being whittled down to the very basics, polygons. Yeah. So if I had been expecting, Super Nintendo and got N64, my mind would have been blown. But I was expecting, Xbox Series 10, and I got N64. So, you know what I mean? Like, I think everybody can relate to that analogy, right?
Yeah, sure. That's just how it goes, so,
Yeah, that's how it goes, and we created something that Raleigh has never seen, and it was, really impressive to those who happened to have the Android device that was required to see it. There was meant to be a way bigger launch for the project. I think it just kind of lost its steam at the very end.
Mm-hmm. You do envision seeing, doing more partnerships like this. I mean, as an artist now, living in 2020, technology is such a vital part of our lifestyle. Mm-hmm. Vital meaning, obviously we don't need to have all the technology we have, but it's embedded into our lifestyle more than ever before at such a dramatic scale. I mean, how do you see technology for you as an artist, especially maybe particularly as a street artist, being incorporated into your work?
I love being presented with opportunities to explore new technologies and new tools, especially tools that are cost prohibitive for me to experiment with on my own.
Yeah.
And I don't have the capacity whatsoever to experiment with augmented reality on my own. I will do any project if the circumstances are right and if I'm invited to do it, and so on the one, I'm in two minds. On the one hand, I'm like, okay, I would really rather not encourage people to experience my art through their phone, because they're looking at their phone often enough during the day. Like, the art in the environment is kind of supposed to be a respite from that, but at the same time, we have all these new tools and technologies and ways to create experiences, and it's almost silly to limit myself based on my kind of
your own potential biases,
like beliefs and philosophies and biases and stuff like that. It's like, okay, well, I could have the opportunity to get out and try something that nobody's ever tried. Like, far be it for me to decide not to do that because of whatever, Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, to some degree, you could probably say something similar about being confined to just a canvas, or breaking out of that completely and saying, no, I'm gonna paint an entire wall that's 6 stories high.
It is the same. It's like saying, going back to like the beginning, when I was only making work that was as big as my room and as broad as like my skills at the time. As you get, like, the art is not necessarily in the product. It's kind of in the process of you engaging with the materials and the tools and creating whatever comes out of that engagement, because it's not like anybody else can make what I make. That's where the real art is, because it's like, it's kind of a pet peeve of mine for people to kind of talk about what art is in a limiting way. Like, it's only art if it's not commercial, and it's only art if it makes you feel something, and it's only art if, like, it's relatable, or like whatever. I think it's like the art is in the mixture of like the creator and the thing that's being created, and the materials that are being used, and the circumstances and the environment in which it's being created, and the idea and all of that. It's not like a thing that you can point to and say that's art. It's like the the entire universe of it. How does that involve AR? Yeah, exactly. And it's like, okay, we were talking about augmented reality and whether I would do that again. I mean, yeah, it's just another way to explore what kind of things I am capable of creating with whatever tools are available. So, and it's great to be able to say, like, yes, I can just let my imagination run wild, and the right person can come along and say, yes, I can produce that. That's how some of the greatest things, the greatest things that we have are created with collaboration and someone saying, like, yeah, let's figure out a way to do this.
Yeah, this we several months back we interviewed a couple of street artists through Coda Street Art from Greensboro, and one thing I notice about artists that are doing stuff at large scale is that they have a sense of adventure. There's a sense of adventure, and I'm curious, like, do you see doing stuff at a large scale egocentric to some degree, and don't take this in a bad way, but like, just being honest, is there an ego part of it? Is it just like, I scaled that mountain? Is it because I want to see my art at such a large scale? Like, where do you fit within that spectrum?
I mean, yeah, it's all of the above. if I'm, I'm honest, I think that the cool thing about street art and muraling is like, the sense of adventure is in its pedigree, comes from vandals and outlaws and people who are willing to go where nobody else would go in the middle of the night just to be able to do it, and
even
and
at the risk
that's
of arrest.
Well, especially at the risk of arrest, it's like that is like the ancestral fuel that street art and graffiti and murals and everything. And now, of course, people are going to get pissed because it's like, well, graffiti and street art and murals are not the same thing. It's like, yeah, they're not, but they're kind of like descended from the common ancestor.
Right.
We descended from primates, and that doesn't mean that we are like, but there's still monkeys and apes, God, that's going to offend some people too. I just compared graffiti artists to primates.
You heard it here first.
You heard it here first, folks. But, and yes, so the common ancestor, graffiti, like I would say, is sort of drives that sense of drives and fuels the propensity to try to like blaze a trail and go where people haven't gone before and do things that are bigger and not even like, blazing a trail can mean whatever you want it to mean. It could be a personal journey, or it could be like, I want to go as big as like bigger than anybody else. Like,
yeah,
or it can just be like, I want to see what I can do that's better than what I did before,
Yeah.
And I think sort of the conversation about the landscape of street art today, capital letters, is probably a conversation for a different podcast because there's just so much to talk about there. But
speak about it from a personal perspective, for like maybe tell me like from a like almost like a personal mission statement for you, not to put it in a corny way, but how do you see it for yourself?
I'll tell you my experience of it, and that will probably answer a lot of your question, which is that so I got into street art by accident. I did not come up as a graffiti artist. I have done vandalism in my life, but I never I didn't come up that way.
Yeah.
I was very bad at being I dabbled in truancy in my life, and I never got away with shit. So graffiti wasn't my path. So anyway, I fell into it in Melbourne, just to backtrack to that thing, and it was really like, okay, here's an art form that you never really considered, and here's a willing and open environment to start exploring that. So start exploring that. And at the time, like, that style of art was becoming sort of commercially viable, and it was always, at the end of the day, it really was a matter of trying to figure out how to make a living doing art. And
sure,
if it hadn't been in the right place at the right time, it might be different. I might have tried to do something else, but there were lots of artists who blazed a path before me, who set it up so that I could explore sort of freely and without fear of destitution or being arrested.
Yeah, I mean, you're living in the highest level of popularity for street art.
It was fantastic, and there were people in Melbourne were doing things that I'd never seen. It was popular. It was pretty free, laws were still kind of punitive, but Australia had already kind of adopted this identity or Melbourne had adopted this identity as like a street art destination. So it was like, it was,
it was kind of cool and accepted.
It was kind of accepted to like people, it was accepted. It was still illegal, but it was accepted. And so and there was just a community of artists who were like, who wanted to paint with you and who would take you and show you stuff. Like there was like I didn't come up in other cities, but I definitely have heard there's a lot more territorial behavior in other places, and I didn't experience that in Melbourne. So that's how I kind of developed that and cut my teeth doing, mural projects, small mural projects at first, and then it got just bigger and bigger. And then I came home and then did, there were the mural festivals that kind of started.
Okay.
And I did a few mural festivals, which were just basically like an event planner comes in and curates a bunch of murals in an area and brings the artists in, and lots of times doesn't pay them, but it's fun. It's like a reunion summer camp kind of way to meet artists and everything. And that has led to city planners and developers and private businesses seeing the value of a mural as an investment, which wasn't really a thing before. Like that's something that I have seen. That's something that I have seen evolve in Raleigh since I've been back. Like whenever I first got back, like there were people who would call themselves big supporters of the arts who at the time said like, no, like you can't paint my building, because they didn't see the value in it.
Right.
So that's a good, I think that's a good thing, of course, because it's the best, like it's such a great time to be a professional artist, because there's so many different ways you can do it.
100%.
I didn't think, who knew? I was like, Sean Hossack said, you should put your work in the street and start marketing yourself that way. I was like, well shit, like I never thought of that. I could
said that to you directly?
Yeah. After the first show, it was like, you should do this. Like put your work up in the street.